Aloha. It's great to see so many friends out here in the audience. Welcome to the J2 panel session, Threats, Challenges, and Opportunities at this year's TechNet Indo-Pacific. I'm Dana Dewey, President of the Mission Solutions Group at SMX. We're a proud platinum supporting sponsor of TechNet this year. Just a quick brief overview of what we do at SMX. We're a leader in next-gen mission support, digital transformation, and IT solutions across the U.S. and really globally, to include here in the great state of Hawaii. Our team combines traditional C5ISR experience with cutting-edge technology to deliver forward-looking insights and innovative solutions. We deliver with an Elevate ISR model that utilizes deep technical and domain knowledge to provide decision platform capability that enhances customers' mission outcomes. So today, I'm pleased to introduce our next session on behalf of AFCEA International and AFCEA Hawaii. Please welcome our moderator for this afternoon's panel, Rear Admiral Thomas Hendershett, who currently serves as the J2 Director of Intelligence, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. As part of his 30-year Navy career, he has enjoyed serving largely in the Indo-Pacific region, to include 3 attaché tours in China. He holds an international affairs degree from George Washington University and a master's degree in advanced international studies. He's qualified in submarines and information dominance and is a recipient of the Rear Admiral Edmund Layton Award for Naval Intelligence. Welcome, Rear Admiral Hendershett.
You don't need to clap. Yeah, Ben, you don't need to clap. Hey, thanks a lot, Dana. And I think this year we're taking a bit of a different approach than I did last year, and I hope it's a bit interesting for you. And that is kind of the challenges and opportunities from Indo-PACOM J2. And I'm here with the real brains of the J2 to talk about what's occurring. So Lauren and I will kind of start off with what's happening in red. What is the PRC up to? What does the theater look like from the intelligence threat perspective? And then Ben and Casey will talk about what are we doing about it. What are the solutions that we are implementing and coming up with? So as I said, and I'll ask everyone to introduce yourself when you begin. But last year, when I was invited to speak, I largely discussed reactions to a senior CODEL visit in 2022, excuse me. And this year, I'd like to review kind of where we are and what has changed over the last year. And if you recall my address at this gathering last year, I talked a lot about the coercive capability and the coercive actions by the PRC, by the CCP, particularly targeted at the CODEL visit in 2022. But I'd start off by saying that the PLA in particular added additional coercive activity this year following the March 23 Tsai Ing-wen transit. And they did that primarily in two spectra. One was in the non-military space, where the CCP invited former President Ma Ying-jeou to visit the mainland concurrent to Tsai's transit of the United States, where the mainland achieved a statement on the 92 consensus from President Ma. Prior to the transit, Beijing carved off Honduras as a Taiwan partner, switching recognition to the mainland. China sanctioned multiple organizations and persons associated with the transit, so the Hudson Institute, the Reagan Library, Madam Geekum Xiao and her family in Washington. And they also announced that they would investigate Taiwan's trade barriers to trade with the mainland. Moving into Indo-PACOM's wheelhouse, watching what happened in the military or paramilitary spectrum last year was, in April, the Fujian Maritime Safety Agency announced joint patrols and inspections into Taiwan Strait with Chinese law enforcement officials taking or claiming on-site inspections aboard vessels in the Strait. And this was a really smart, coercive move by the CCP. It served two purposes. Number one, the ultimate goal of intimidation of Taipei. But number two, by claiming or by stating that they would conduct these on-site inspections in the Strait, they exerted a claim of, and I'll use air quotes here, of sovereign rights and jurisdiction over internal waters of the Strait. And both of those suppositions are preposterous, that the Taiwan Strait is an internal water of the PRC. But moving into the post-transit, the PLA executed a 3-day exercise called Joint Sword in the northern end of the Taiwan Strait. They sortied CV-17 Shandong, the second carrier, to operate east of Taiwan. According to media, the PLA Navy executed about 600 sorties while east of Taiwan. They undertook live-fire drills near Matsu Island in the Strait, and they increased surface patrols around Taiwan by about 200%. And since we last talked, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs launched a new map of the region. You're probably all tracking that. Again, exerting territorial claims where the mainland does not enjoy sovereignty, including a new 10-dash line. And the CCP, you are also tracking the news, the CCP corruption crackdown continues with the firing of Foreign Minister Qin Gang and the disappearance of the Party and State Minister of Defense, General Li Shangfu. You also saw in developments Admiral Aquilino and the Assistant Secretary of Defense, Dr. Eli Ratner, about 2 weeks ago talk about air behavior by the PRC. But this dangerous behavior is not only continuing in the maritime and air domain, but I would argue that it's accelerating from the mainland. This past year, there was a 150-yard closest point of approach between DDG-132 China Navy ship Suzhou and the USS Changhoon. Admiral Aquilino addressed a recent PLAF intercept of a B-52. And Dr. Ratner highlighted in a press conference in the Pentagon about 2 weeks ago much of this activity. And some of the statistics he quoted were the fact that since the fall of 2021, we've seen more than 180 incidents of concern, more in the past 2 years than in the decade before combined. About 200 cases where PLA operators have performed reckless maneuvers or discharged chaff or shot off flares or approached too rapidly or too close. And when you take into account PLA intercepts against other states, the number increases to about 300 cases against U.S., allied, and partner aircraft over the last 2 years. In January of this year, an American aircraft in the South China Sea, acting completely in accordance with international law and hundreds of miles from land, was approached by a PLA fighter at a very high rate of speed, closing to about 30 feet CPA and maintaining there for approximately 15 minutes. Dr. Ratner classified this as a centralized and concerted campaign to perform these risky behaviors in order to coerce and change a lawful U.S. operational activity and that of U.S. allies and partners. We've also witnessed PLA pilots deliberately interfering with and creating turbulence for U.S. operators by flying in front of aircraft at close distances. And you've seen video of a PLA fighter jet crossing in front of a lawfully operated asset at approximately 100 yards, forcing the U.S. pilot to fly through the PLA's wake, again, at speeds of hundreds of miles an hour and at an altitude of tens of thousands of feet. And of course, recently, through the collision of a China Coast Guard vessel with the Philippines resupply vessel at Second Thomas Shoal, and of equal and perhaps even more concern is Beijing's mind-bending accusations following the collision that it was Manila, vice the China Coast Guard, that had somehow conducted operations contrary to international law. There's previous lasing incidents between China and the Philippines, water cannon deployments, and this is just continuing a theme of coercive behavior from the mainland. So in conclusion to my opening comments, I would suggest that the PLA's coercive campaign against Taiwan against the U.S. and against our partners continues. In the physical spaces of air and sea, in the cyber domain, as outlined recently in a media report on a cyber attack against the Department of State, and in the diplomatic and legal realm, as evidenced by the indictments of 2 PRC nationals for the operation of an illegal police station for the Ministry of Public Security in the Bronx. So the challenge with which we're dealing today is not only that which was outlined in the China Military Power Report that I would commend to you all, released, about 2 weeks ago, Lauren? About 2 weeks ago, but really in a holistic subversion of the international rules-based order organized and leveraged by the CCP in an attempt to redo the system, frankly, under which China grew rich and maintained the peace. This system not only enabled China's rise, but largely kept the peace in the Western Pacific for the last 80 years. And with that, Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Aloha, everybody. My name is Lauren Johnson. I am a military intelligence analyst in the Indo-PACOM J2, and I have been in that position now for a little over 20 years. My job, alongside my colleagues, is to kind of understand what's going on with the bad guys. So Admiral Hendershot laid out the geopolitical context and what's changing. What I want to focus on a little bit is the military dimension and what we've seen specifically from the PLA. Because in the last 20 years, we've seen a dramatic change in all of the theater's adversaries. North Korea, clearly a different problem today than it was 20 years ago. Russia, a resurgence and a capability in the Indo-Pacific that is fundamentally different and more challenging today. But all of it pales by comparison with what we've seen from the PLA. Now, we're an experienced nation that's been in conflict for 2 decades. Okay, so what? Most of our combat experience is in a completely different sort of environment where we enjoyed unchallenged technological overmatch, positional overmatch, logistics overmatch, use of space, cyber, advanced capabilities. That's not the case in the current environment here. So if you'll go with me here, let's take a very quick trip through time, if you will. So 20 years ago, in this theater, as we looked at comparative capabilities with the PRC, we had massive advantage, particularly in the qualitative dimension, but frankly, we also had a quantitative advantage because the PLA was not an expeditionary military. They're a big, bloated, internally focused force that had very little advanced capability into the competitive spaces, whether it was around Taiwan or in the East or South China Sea or wherever. 20 years ago, advantage, home team, right? 10 years ago, we started to lose and really, I guess at that point, lost our quantitative advantage. As the PLA modernization program was now spitting out large quantities of pretty good quality stuff. But I think most would agree we had, at that point in time, largely better stuff, better training, better leadership, and a more comprehensive warfighting capability. Okay? 5 years ago, we saw big bites taken out of our qualitative advantage. Because 5 years ago is when the J-20 Alpha entered the combat inventory of the PLA, followed shortly thereafter by the Renhai, or the Type 55 class of guided missile cruisers, a pretty darn capable major surface combatant with multi-mission capabilities in the contested spaces. Which brings us to today. Where we are today. We face an increasingly modern and, in some cases, superior adversary across a number of warfighting capabilities, and the PLA continues to expand at frankly, an eye-watering pace, with more and new stuff entering the inventory all the time. Now, you can argue we still have better training, we still have better leadership, but I would also suggest that those advantages are also eroding as the Chinese are learning and implementing best practices from the way we train, the way we develop, and the way we integrate our forces. But let's be honest, if you look at the PLA today, it's a little bit like looking in a mirror. Go think about it for a second. A J-20 looks an awful lot like an F-22. Okay, Liu Yang 3 destroyer looks a lot like an Aegis-class destroyer. PLA combines arms teams, functionally, organizationally, pretty similar to a U.S. Army Brigade combat team. Structural, 5 geographic theater commands and 3 functional commands look an awful lot like the U.S. Unified Command Plan, just overlaid on the Chinese regional problem set instead of on the entire world. And even joint doctrine, if you look and read Chinese joint doctrine, it kind of looks like Joint Pub 3.0. Okay? So I would contend that we're kind of at an equilibrium today. And we are both at an inflection point where accelerating innovation, the theme for this week's conference, is in play not only on our side, but it's clearly on the PLA side as well. Let me offer a quote. Last week in the PLA Daily, it included this statement. Today's world is facing major changes at a level unseen in a century. A worldwide S&T revolution is surging forward, and the waves of global military revolution are deeply converging. Technology has never had such a profound impact on our overall national security and military strategy, and it has never had such a profound impact on national defense construction and military development as it does today. That could have been an American quote, but that's what the adversary is doing. So where are they focusing? It's a little bit hyperbole and a little bit of a stretch, but not by much, to say, frankly, they're focusing everywhere. But let me try to be a little bit more specific. So Admiral Hendershett referenced the China Military Power Report that just came out. It listed a few areas of technological focus for the PLA. Next generation artificial intelligence, and then goes on and lists a couple of dozen sort of related technologies. Quantum information, brain science, biotechnology, deep space, deep sea, and polar-related technologies. And then a couple other sources that I looked at, autonomous weapons, disaggregated ISR. All things kind of areas of specific focus. And we can't forget about the stuff that they're already deeply involved in. Hypersonics. Okay? 9 of the top 10 leading research institutions worldwide in hypersonics are Chinese. Okay? Novel ballistic and cruise missile applications, ASAT, anti-satellite stuff, unmanned and autonomous sea systems. And here's an even more stunning statistic. All 10 of the leading global research institutions in undersea drones are Chinese. Okay? Remote sensing systems, drone swarms, high-altitude airships, also known as balloons. Okay, a lot of the stuff I rattled off is about how to kill the adversary. Better weapons, better technology, more efficient to kill the adversary. But there's also a substantial effort being devoted to the decision-making processes to more quickly and efficiently decide what to kill, what order to kill it with, what system to use to kill it with, under the ideas of informatization or intelligentization. Horribly hard words to pronounce, better written down. So, okay, let me conclude with this. From my vantage point up the hill at Camp Smith, I see both in the U.S., us and the U.S. at kind of the same place, looking for the technologies, capabilities, and processes that will allow us to gain decisive advantage. The PRC is able to leverage some unique things: authoritarian systems, state-owned enterprises, military-civil fusion processes, cyber exploitation, cyber theft, intellectual property theft, ways to accelerate and gain efficiencies in their system. We got a real challenge, I think. Admiral Aquilino has a banner on his theater strategy that says, think, act, and operate differently. As you all represent a number of technological innovations and initiatives, I will challenge you to do the same things. Think, act, and operate differently so that we can leverage the traditional advantage that our system has been able to produce in rapidly prototyping and developing technologies that they haven't thought about yet. We can't just do better at the same stuff. We've got to be different. Thanks very much.
So I think one of the things that's important for us to think about from an innovation perspective and how we're going to move forward is Lauren mentioned kind of this unique piece that they have and how they're able to leverage authoritarian capabilities and whatnot. I happen to think that that's a strength, but I also think that's a weakness, right? And this is where you guys come in. The opportunity that we have in leveraging that, competitive capitalist approach, if you will, but more importantly, the collaborative aspect of how we're able to bring in unique ideas, that's the strength that we're able to take advantage of as we move forward. So, one of the things that the J2 and Lauren mentioned is how they have changed. They've grown in numbers and they've grown in quality of the numbers that they have. So for us, that becomes a knowledge problem, right? So how do I handle the information, the knowledge critical for me to execute certain mission sets? So when we sit back, we think about, what do I do for my domain awareness so I know where the adversary is? Well, that's oftentimes the same information I'm using to understand the adversary, and how it means from their force disposition, what is their order of battle, what are their capabilities, what is the intent based off of that. That's oftentimes the same information I'm going to use for how I do my collection orchestration so that I can maintain that awareness of the adversary. And it's oftentimes the same information I use to apply effects against the adversary, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic. And so one of the challenges that we've had is that all of those same information, but it's oftentimes been in different stovepipes and different structures. And so one of the critical pieces that we're working is how do we streamline our ability to get into that knowledge? How do we streamline our ability to access and move that knowledge quickly into the applications that are necessary? Likewise, how do we standardize and streamline the data that we're looking to auto-enrich those knowledge repositories? And so, the analogy I like to use is think of a tree. The roots of the tree is those common data fabrics, that data that is just enriching the tree. It comes up, it's organic in how we pull it into the information we're going to use. And up in the branches of the tree, you've got all the different applications. You've got the software that analysts and operators are going to be using as they go and they kind of provide coverage over what you're doing. But to me, the core element, the most important piece is the trunk of the tree. That's the knowledge. So how we think of the roots enriching that trunk, and then how that trunk is then able to support and stabilize the canopy, and that is all the applications that we use. And, sometimes those leaves are going to change, or applications are going to go away, but new applications are going to come in. But oftentimes, a key component, the thing that's not going to change is the knowledge requirements that we have to execute battle management and command and control. So we've been pretty heavily focused on how do we get a standardized approach to how we're doing the data, but more importantly, how are we standardizing knowledge structures to support battle management, command and control so that we can become agnostic on applications. So some of you might have heard I was on the JFN panel this morning, and I made the comment that if you have a proprietary capability, I'm not even going to talk to you. And I hold to that because as we move forward, we have a tremendous amount of legacy capability that we are never going to get rid of, right? We're always going to have different data sets, different, sensing applications and tools that are out there, sense-making tools that we have to leverage. When I get into targeting, I have programmatic softwares that have certifications associated with them that I can't deviate from. I'm never going to get away from different legacy and this non-proprietary environment. So I need everybody to play nice with one another. I need that collaboration. I need that constant development of tools and capabilities that allow us to bring the best of breed for what all of you are working on and developing in conjunction with what the government's developing as well to bear. And so I think one thing to keep in mind is as we look at standardizing how we do data, we standardize how we do knowledge, that inherently forces us into an application agnostic environment that allows us to be able to quickly and dynamically shift between applications as we need to in order to keep pace with the adversary that we're dealing with. That's what we're looking at on how we do the intelligence side. We have been advising our operational side that, hey, we need that to go in that direction as well. And so we've been trying to take the lessons learned from the intelligence community as we talk with the operational community to say, hey, how can we help provide a little bit of insight into what we've done into knowledge management, information management? How can we ensure that how you structure and manage your knowledge is the same as how the intel community is managing and structuring its knowledge? Not that you're going to have necessarily the same attributes, if you will, but for us, we're looking at object-based intelligence, object-based production as a critical component of that. So I can have a blue object, doesn't have to have the same attributes as a red object, but the fact that we have a common structure and how we're bringing that information together, it simplifies my ability to take both of those knowledge sets into an application where I have to quickly manage and process information at speed and scale.
Aloha, good afternoon. I'm CW 5 Casey Lynch. My job is to make everything Ben just said a reality. What I do,
Good luck with that.
yeah, it's a tall order. The reality of it is what I do for the J2 as a senior warrant officer advisor is I seek those gaps and seams. I try to find them where our processes, our personnel, our talent within our organization is I won't use the word lacking, but we don't specifically have that skill set. And then I go out and I try to find it, or I try to find the training to correct it, or I try to find somebody in the JIAC who may have a skill set that we didn't know about, and we try to rectify that. On the opposite side of that, if that is just something we don't have, then I go talk to Ben and I say, hey, I need a program, I need an application, I need a set of systems that do this in order to enable better shared understanding within the command. Because if you can't get shared understanding, then you can't make informed decisions, and if you can't make informed decisions, then operations don't happen on time. I've been doing MI for about 28 years. I started as an E1 at 17 years old, a week out of high school. I've seen a lot in my 28 years. I've done a lot, but I have definitely not done everything. As I went through these notes and realized that between the J2, Mr. Johnson, and Ben, they've covered every topic that I wanted to cover. I'm just going to say this. My job is as simple and as simple terms as I can make it, is to seek out problems, challenges, and issues and try to find solution to those before any of these people know about that problem.
You're failing.
That's
I didn't say I was good at it.
yeah, it's truly a team effort. I would say I know Admiral Aquilino is here tomorrow. The theater, I grew up in the theater, as I think we all did, and when some of us who are on the more mature and not older side, when you look back at what's evolved in the theater, it's really pretty fascinating. One of the analogies I've been using lately is I remember when I was in the JIAC in the 90s, there was a Taiwan Strait centerline crossing. So there's one PLA Air Force plane that crossed the center line, and you would have thought that the world was coming to an end and the war was going to start tomorrow. And what the PLA has done is normalize much of this activity so that the world doesn't even yawn anymore when that activity occurs. So whether it's using a water cannon or ramming a ship to prevent a resupply, or scores of centerline crossings or operations inside the Taiwan Air Defense Identification Zone, it's really remarkable how quickly the PLA has normalized the world into what is happening, and truly a case of boiling the frog, where the pressure is applied, and in short term the theater doesn't even perceive that there's been a change. So thanks very much for having us today. And I think we're all eager, or at least ready, to field some questions. So thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. The first question for the panel. What's the best way for industry to share relevant J2 capabilities?
So I think that there's a couple ways for industry to plug into what the Defense Intelligence Enterprise is doing. So within the J2, we really kind of have three venues through which we pull in capability in what we're doing. Number one is through the combatant command itself. The entryway for that is through the J8. We have a vendor vetting capability that we do that focuses on the intel capability, but we do that in conjunction with the J8. So that is the entry point within the combatant command. I would say the second way is through the services. And so in some cases, that's going to be through the service components themselves, but oftentimes that's going to be through the services, big Navy, big Army, as they're the man, train, and equip entity that's responsible for bringing capability to bear and then incorporating it into how the fighting formations are going to execute. And then I would say the third venue is through the Defense Intelligence Enterprise and the IC. And so that's going to be the combat support agencies themselves, or it's going to be through either USD INS or ODNI. Those are the primary entree points that you kind of get into where we're at and where we're constantly looking. The strength of that is that there's a diversity of capability we're able to look at. The weakness of that is that that's a whole lot of different acquisition channels and pillars or silos that we have to deal with. Causes complications when we think about interoperability and integration. Causes challenges when we think about how we resource and manage how we're going to support different programs as they come online. But that is kind of the nature of our acquisition process right now from a DoD perspective. But that's kind of how I would answer that, is kind of how you can get into the community.
I think if I could just add one point, I think, as you all know, the Secretary has signaled the priority of the challenge ahead. And to Ben's point, I think that there's now largely a recognition that if it'll work in this theater, it'll work anywhere. And there's a movement to increase experimentation here, and a recognition that if there's a tool, if it passes muster here, it'll service any of the COCOMs.
Agree.
I got it. Yep. Real quick on the one of the things I was going to mention that Ben and the J2 just covered is you talk about building a tool, right? Well, as somebody who has literally had to set up something in the desert and get it to work, make the tool easy to use. Make it easy to set up and tear down. If you are creating a tool that requires a tractor truck full of support equipment, you might want to rethink what you're doing, especially in this theater, because tractor trucks don't go on water very well. At least I'm not a Navy guy, so I hear the ballast and sinking, right?
They float for a little bit.
Yeah. But the point is, you got to realize, as smart as most of the soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen, and Space Guardians, and Coast Guardians, and Guardians of the Galaxy that you're going to see in this AOR are, when it comes to equipment, if you make it difficult to use, we won't use it. If you make it a challenge to set up and configure, and it takes 90% of the time that I have to make it operational, and I only get to use it for 10%, I'm going to push it aside, and I'm going to open up Microsoft Excel, and I'm going to insert a pivot table, and I'm going to start doing data analytics that way, right?
Analysts are like water.
Yeah.
Take the path of least resistance.
It's got to be easy. And I'll tell you, the best GUIs that you can create are the ones that the analysts want to use and the commanders want to see.
Yep.
If you can cross that bridge, you're going to make some money.
Yep.
Thank you. Next question. Is the PRC base at Fiery Cross Reef considered an asset or a liability for their forces, now and during conflict?
I'll take that one, I think. So, great question to divide it into two places, because I would argue it is absolutely a fantastic asset today. In the competition space, it gives them the capability of deploying and sustaining more forces to the extent of the South China Sea in order to have a more robust, more sustained, and more lethal presence kind of day in and day out. If conflict is joined, it's alone and unafraid and exposed and likely to die rapidly. It's very difficult to sustain something that's that far away from its support network. But we're a long ways, hopefully, between today and the conflict phase. So it's absolutely a substantial advantage for China to have that today. We all know the expression, possession is 9/10 of the law. They're there all the time. And it's not just Fiery Cross Reef. It's the 3 large outposts at Fiery Cross, Mischief, and Subi. It's the 4 supporting outposts at the other 4 smaller outposts in the Spratlys that provide all the infrastructure, maritime and air domain awareness that feeds into that. And it's also the paracels. We sometimes forget about that because it's a little closer to the Chinese mainland. But what the Chinese did in the Spratlys, they prototyped in the paracels a decade earlier. So we should have seen it coming. We should have been better able to respond to it because they'd shown us the playbook. And here we are today with them having a substantial forward operating presence in the southern part of the South China Sea.
Yeah, if I can just double down on Lauren's comment. Lieutenant Hendershot 26 years ago never would have thought that I would have to pay as much attention to maritime law, and particularly as an attaché in Beijing. The amount of sparring I did with my PLA interlocutors on this subject was unbelievable. But I just point out that it's frequently forgotten that the Chinese do not have a formal claim in the Spratly Islands. And it is ambiguous by design. Lauren just referenced the paracels. The Chinese claim in the paracels is very, very distinct, and we understand it very well. And when we conduct freedom of navigation operations against a parasail claim, we don't conduct FON against a nation. We conduct a FON against an excessive or illegal claim. And remember that several countries claim the paracels, but the Chinese baseline claim is very, very well understood. My point in the Spratlys and around Fiery Cross Reef is there is no formal claim. We don't know if the Chinese intend to claim everything inside the 9, now 10-dash line, if it's just the land, if it's all the water, if it's a territorial sea. What Beijing hopes is that without a formal claim, we award to it what it doesn't claim. So if a nation avoids 10 miles or 12 miles from Fiery Cross Reef, we have just given it a territorial sea. It's a really masterful approach by the PRC.
Thank you. Are there any intelligence lessons learned that you can share from the Israeli-Hamas and Russia-Ukraine conflicts?
I'll jump on that. Absolutely. So we have looked at Russia-Ukraine as an example of working with a partner where we can work on how are we doing interoperability, so data exchange, knowledge exchange, how do we work through application sharing so that we can feed into their processes and we can enable them. We've also looked at them to try and garner kind of what have been their lessons learned as they have engaged in the conflict to be able to incorporate into some of our TTPs and our approaches. So there's definitely something there. I would say just as a prior CT analyst, I mean, the Israel-Hamas conflict, there's a lot that's happening there that we kind of already know. We've just spent the last 20 years playing that game. We're pretty good at that game. I think the Russia-Ukraine one's the one that's more important for us when we think about our AOR.
Yeah, I think, Lauren and I were just kind of quick writing each other notes about how much we're learning. I think one of the things that I'd immediately point out is the importance of warning. And, my message here last year and part of my message this year has been how PLA forces, PRC forces, be they PLA or Coast Guard, how they are slowly normalizing activity. And with the normalization of activity comes an increased difficulty in warning. When things that should present warning scenarios become normal, that's the definition of erosion of the warning problem. So I think that particularly in the Israeli-Hamas issue, just the ability to warn for what is going to happen. I think that much of what Ben alluded to with his tree, the ability to build a sharing system, intelligence systems that are, and I think, the J6 is here, so I'm going to say something, and if I get over my skis, I'm going to quick phone a friend. But the ability to build systems that are multilateral by design, even if you don't know who the partner is going to be really key, as well as for us in the intelligence business, as well as the authorities that go with that, and the authorities to share. And then fundamentally, to Casey's point, and this is something that my battle buddy, Master Gun Sonnabend, is looking at training. How do we as the joint force look at this? And we've all talked about the fact that the joint force has been at war for 2 decades, and we know CENTCOM. We know the CENTCOM fight very well. But we're in a completely different environment where this adversary is extremely complicated, extremely advanced, and extremely capable, and our schoolhouses are still coming to terms with having to completely change focus on a very high-end fight that is no longer a CT fight, and a high-end fight where the adversary will challenge us in every domain. This is no longer a fight where the Navy arrives and the Navy is there to kind of deliver fires. It's a fight where the Navy has to fight to get into the theater and is attacked, whether through fires or cyber, the entire way. How do we all get our head around the fact that it's a completely different conflict for which we are preparing?
So on the two's point, and what Mr. Johnson was saying earlier, the other side of this coin is processes. It's not always training somebody to do something. It's not always the system itself, but it's the processes, and it's not always just an intel process. One of the things that we looked at, especially when you look at the Russia-Ukraine crisis, is getting the right information to the right person at the right time to make an informed decision is critical, right? And if you don't have the right processes in place and you're not structured in order to take in the information, turn it into intelligence, and then analyze that intelligence and provide that to the decision maker, you might as well go home. So one of the things that we looked at in our structure was we were set up in a regional construct. We had 3 regions that we monitored and we provided intelligence on, and we basically, in Army terms, acted as 3 individual ACEs, or analytical control elements, fully functional. Well, looking at that's not the right way to do things. So it was effective to a point, but it's not getting after what we're doing, because as Mr. Johnson said at the beginning, everything changes, continues to change, and will forever change in this AOR. So you have to be adaptable and flexible in order to meet those challenges. So we went from this regional outlook into what we call a J22 and a J23, with the 2-2 being responsible for looking at long-term analysis over the whole of the AOR, and the 2-3 being responsible for short-term, near-term analysis in support of operations. Right? And what this allows us to do is it divides up temporally our responsibilities within the analytical realms and allows us to never have what I call a cold start to an event, because the 2-2 is always looking ahead, is always passing that off to the 2-3. The 2-3 passes it off to the 3. Operation commences, event commences, whatever it is, and then that's given back to the 2-2 for archiving and putting into knowledge management. And that cycle just goes on and on and on and on.
I think I'm just going to add on to that,
Please.
because I think that process piece is really important. So when we talk about modernization, innovation within the 2, I always liken it to 3 lines of effort. So the one that we're here for is technology. And this is the one you hear the most about. Like, yeah, there's so much stuff we've got to do from technology and how we're bringing it together. But the other 2 lines of effort are process and policy and authority. And if those aren't modernizing and innovating in line with the technology, you will fail, or at least you won't get full success. Because, as Casey just laid out, if you have to know how to fight, and you have to know how you're going to fight the adversary. How we would engage against ISIS is not how we're going to engage against the PRC. Those processes, those approaches, those methodologies, tradecraft, TTPs are going to be different. And the technology, as you modernize to deal with that type of from one adversary to another, you have to change those. Likewise, the policy piece becomes a huge, this gets into what we talk about with sharing. How do we set the groundwork so that we can make those processes and those technologies actually be effective?
I think, Ben, that's a really fantastic point, and I think that when I talk about this with senior policymakers, the technology, I would argue, in many cases is the easy solution.
It is.
But the real challenge is when you tell people, hey, we don't have the policies to do what you're asking us to do. And in some cases, those policies are not even resident in the Department of Defense or in the intelligence community, but are policies that will take years to effect because they require a significant change by a partner that is unaccustomed to doing what you're trying to do. It's very difficult for policymakers to get their head around the fact that, can I not just build a box to do this? You can build the box, but everything that goes into the box is owned by somebody else, and getting the permissions to do what you want to do with the data is extremely, extremely challenging. And I've lived in this space now, and the real Sisyphean tasks in some cases of trying to get those policies changed.
Thank you. The next question from the audience. Is the U.S. prepared to act differently in response to a gray zone provocation by the PLA in the South China Sea?
Wow.
Yeah, I thought just because you quoted Admiral Aquilino of Think Act differently, I thought this was definitely you. I think it's really difficult to answer hypotheticals. And I can't do that because I don't know what the hypothetical is. I can say, however, that not just for the United States, but for many of our partners, they too are now perceiving that in many cases the military threat of the PLA is not the primary threat. The gray zone problem that it brings is a real difficulty for all of or many of the South China Sea claimants to deal with. So a few examples. Whether the Coast Guard or the PLA, whether it's an aircraft conducting an extremely close and unsafe intercept or a lasing at sea or a shouldering or ramming, I think what we are learning as a region is the utility of a bright flashlight on the activity. And by that I mean that you've observed Manila's behavior in embedding media on resupply ships and releasing footage to the world of coercive behavior. This gray zone activity is an attempt to reshape the norm and to coerce unacceptable behavior or to use coercive unacceptable behavior to change the status quo. When the world sees that activity, when the region sees that activity and speaks out in support of the oppressed by saying that's not illegal activity, the resupply is not illegal, or wow, that intercept is quite close, I would argue that it does change behavior, it does highlight what's happening, and it does cause the CCP at least to reevaluate their approach. So I think to say what are we going to do, I don't know. I would say that we've already seen whether the example I gave during my opening comments of Dr. Ratner and Admiral Aquilino highlighting what this activity is and how dangerous it is. I think that is able to reshape and introduce deterrence into Beijing.
And I'll just add a quick comment. I don't know that we are fully prepared to act differently right now, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And let me explain a couple of reasons why I say that. Number one, we're incorporating more of the non-military elements of national power into that conversation and into the active space. So the U.S. Coast Guard, much more present in the South China Sea than they have been traditionally. So there's more of a reciprocal matching of China Coast Guard to U.S. Coast Guard instead of China Coast Guard to U.S. Navy, which clever propagandists like the CCP can spin into U.S. escalation. So there's an awareness of the optics of the situation and a greater willingness to put better like capabilities into play. But it's not just the U.S. It's the Philippines building out their Coast Guard so they don't have to be so reliant upon the Philippine Navy. It's the Vietnamese, the Malaysians, the Indonesians, the other claimants doing the same sort of thing to build a greater gray zone reciprocal capability in a way that illuminates that. And I could not foot stomp any harder the comment that Admiral Hendershot said about the media space and the information space to expose to public scrutiny the reality of what the PRC is doing. Face it, they're a bully. And they're a bully against smaller, less capable actors. They try to bully us, and it doesn't work so well. But if you look at the relative statistics on unsafe and irregular interactions with military capabilities, you'll find the percentage rate against the Australians and the Canadians much higher than it is against the Americans. Why? Because they think they can pick on them. They think those capitals have less commitment and investment to the problem and are more easily swayed in the idea of avoiding conflict by simply being absent within it. So we're not great in the gray zone space, but we're definitely getting better.
Thank you. In terms of China being a bully, how serious is the current economic downturn in the PRC, and what economic factors are affecting its ability to project influence and take action against adversaries?
Yeah. So since my time in Beijing, I carry around, and it's literally behind me, I carry around my elevator pitch. When I was in Beijing, I would frequently get calls from 3 and 4 stars, and they'd say, "Hey, Tom, what keeps Xi Jinping up at night?" And every one of them was hoping I would say, "You do, sir. You know, your forces certainly are what Xi worries about." But this list that I carry around in my notebook is about 24 items long, and none of them are the U.S. military. So to the economic downturn piece, what's happening in the economy is worrisome, and it's worrisome to senior leaders in the PRC. And if we look at kind of how we got here, you'll recall that Gorbachev had visited the PRC in 1989, immediately prior to the Tiananmen Square actions. The CCP took a lesson from the fall of the Soviet Union that they cannot afford to allow that to happen in the PRC. So the CCP viewed the combination of perestroika and glasnost, the liberalization of the political environment as well as the economic environment in the Soviet Union, as what led to the downfall of the communists in the Soviet Union. So the deal that the CCP made was that the CCP was willing to liberalize the Chinese economy, but they would never be able to liberalize the Chinese political structure. And that was a Faustian deal made with the people of China, that you will grow rich, but you will not have the liberal, democratic life that the West enjoys. And for me, my counterparts in the PRC, I'll be 54 this year. They've all lived through the Cultural Revolution, so 66 to 76. And those families all remember how hard that life was. And those families today have TVs, have 2 cars, their kids are going to college in the PRC. If they're very well off, their kids are going to college in the United States. The problem here is this Faustian bargain means that the Chinese economy, which had from the 80s through the 90s and into the 2000s enjoyed double-digit growth every year, that's not happening anymore. And as the economy turns, and there are real structural challenges and real bellwethers on the horizon, the real estate market, it's got to be of huge concern for the PRC about what the economy means and what it means, for us, what it means in the security sphere for the PRC. It's not an encouraging perspective.
And from a practical standpoint, we've not yet seen the economic challenges directly impacting defense budgets, production output, fielding rates. So modernization continues to be a national and party priority, and it continues to enjoy a preeminent position in the prioritization of resources for the state. Nor did COVID have a significant impact on the modernization plan, believe it or not. Despite the impact to production lines and work centers, it's still kind of continued at pace. So the Chinese have been able to absorb a lot and continue.
Lauren, I don't like to talk about COVID in China as a veteran of it, so thanks.
Thank you. Can you comment on Taiwan's participation in RIMPAC? Will they observe next year?
So I know this is a very frequent topic of opinions and occasionally a conversation in Washington. I have no insight and no comment on whether or not the Taiwans will be at RIMPAC or be observers.
Thank you, sir. Understood. What, you may not answer this one very thoroughly either, but what J2 needs are currently underserved by existing capabilities where commercials should be focused to either augment or replace?
I'll surprise you. I'll take that one, and then I'll turn to Ben. Here's where I'm really concerned in capabilities, and that is as the IC's capabilities continue to expand, the AI ML requirements to keep up with that expansion are not expanding at the same pace at what is needed to keep up with the modernization and the expansion. So that in many cases we are eagerly waiting, I think it's fair to say, and hopeful that those technological capabilities will catch up. Fundamentally, I think it's much easier to say this. It's no surprise that we are in a budgetary constrained environment, and it's probably not going to get any better. So we're not going to get more men and women working the problem set. We're going to need technological solutions to sort through an increasingly avalanching amount of data. My challenge is that, and I think we've all heard this growing up, but we're living it. More data is not necessarily good because in some cases more data is just clobbering. It's too much. The ability to sort through the data to find the right data at the right time for the right solution is where we really, really need help. Am I going to jail after that comment?
No,
Okay.
no, I think you're good. Up until about the mid-'90s, the U.S. government was the largest investor in capability development. Right? So late 80s, mid-90s. That's not true anymore. Right? Industry has by far the largest amount of money on R&D and development. So to a degree, you're driving the bus now, right? And it is not uncommon for the capabilities that we see in industry to shape the way that we try to approach certain types of problems. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody's surprised that government acquisition programs are A, hard to kill, and B, oftentimes last well beyond how long they should have lasted. Okay, and so that becomes a challenge for us at times, many times. So I think the key here is as you guys are moving forward in industry from a collaborative, cooperative perspective, you help shape somewhat some of the things that come to bear. We're seeing technologies that are coming out today that have been commercialized that weren't really accessible to the commercial industry but are being used for commercial purposes now. So when you think about like satellite imagery and whatnot, those were things that typically had been a government program before. Is now there's lots of commercial access to that stuff, and it's being used for how can we augment things that we're doing as well as how can we use it for just commercial purposes. And so as those capabilities come online, we're constantly trying to pay attention to that, look at where the opportunities are for us to feed into that. But the key that I will stress is that, to the point that the J2 made is that if right now, the AI/ML paradigm is 80-20, right? 80% of your time is spent on conditioning data, 20% of it is on training. How do we flip that paradigm? And so data standardization, knowledge structure standardization, we believe that if we can really truly get to a cohesive, authoritative knowledge repository for how we handle intelligence data and for how we handle operational data, that will flip the paradigm on what we're looking at when it comes to AI/ML, to 20% conditioning, 80% training. And so it's how you guys play well with one another and helping industry drive governance and communicate to, to the larger entities that, hey, these are the standards, this is how we need to get there, and then how do we cooperatively get to that point to where at some point nobody's going to fight it. It becomes a fait accompli.
One of the things that Ben likes to focus in on a lot is the common data structure and specifically object-based production. I have been that analyst that has had FusionNet, JIOC-I, Sydney, C2PC, the IO-EO database from higher headquarters all open up at the same time and manually correlating those databases in Excel. Those days have got to end. I don't have time for that.
Casey, you're old too. You just told everybody you're old too.
I believe the word is seasoned.
There you go.
Seasoned, sir. Point being, though, right? You're absolutely right, sir. We have more information available to us as analysts now than we can digest. I used to write down radio calls on carbon paper. I mean, 5 an hour was like, oh my God, what do I do with this? Now I've got millions of emails, millions of pieces of data to go through, right? The correlation, the collation, and the, for lack of a better word, gold dust hunting within that message traffic is what we need help with. Because everybody says, oh, I want that golden nugget, but what they don't realize is intelligence is not a golden nugget. That golden nugget is made out of tiny, tiny, tiny particles that you pull out of different places, and you build that golden nugget. So help us find the gold dust so that we can make that nugget. I made that up. That's trademarked right here.
Well, I think we're almost out of time. Admiral, any closing remarks before we close the panel?
I think to Ben's point, this we're kind of counting on everybody to play this game, and we need everybody's help to get after this. This competition, and part of the challenge, I think, for us is our focus on the today has to also be balanced with the tomorrow and also with the 5 years from now. The Secretary has been clear that this challenge is a near, medium, and long-term problem. And for us to be able to do everything at the same time to get ready for the tonight and prepare for the future is going to need the partnership and the good ideas from everybody. So to Ben's point, there are multiple avenues and entry points for you all to get in and to help. And please, if you got a solution, please let us know and help us understand how we can get after this. Thanks very much for having us here today. Most importantly, to my teammates, thanks for the job you guys are doing every day.
Sir.
I think we owe a round of applause to this panel. Admiral, thank you for being here. Thank you for having your team here. And in lieu of gifts, AFCEA Hawaii is going to make a monetary donation to the Friends of Windward Wounded Warriors and the good work that Chaplain Steve Jensen does there. Thank you.